Yeah.
In your comparison of Wilson and Bush that you made, George W. Bush, and the principle living on, I'm curious as to whether Wilson was just idealistic or whether he argued, as I think the second inaugural or the State of the Union from George W. Bush, that the principle is in America's best interest. Or was it simply an idealistic principle that Wilson said we ought to make the world free for democracy?
No, I don't mean for a moment, first of all, I don't mean to be dismissive of idealism or principle. At the very beginning of this nation, the founders defined it as a land unlike any other. They thought that it was a wonderful thing that we were isolated, that we weren't going to be corrupted by the old world, by their practices. This was a place to begin the world over again. This was a kind of Eden. So there is that strain of idealism, of American exceptionalism, that runs from the very beginning. Wilson's belief was, he tried to stay out of the war because he thought the United States could be an honest broker. Even though his sympathies might have been with one side or the other, he had, in effect, the hard-headedness to believe that the United States would have much more influence as a neutral, someone who could, in fact, try to bring the two warring parties together. And he was greatly admired for that. In the end, the Germans made it impossible for him because of their submarine attacks on American ships. So once we entered the war, to justify that fact, I think Wilson came to the belief that it was necessary to create some kind of permanent, rational, peacekeeping instrument that would bring the nations of the world together in a way that he had tried and failed individually, and to prevent future war. Now, is that impossibly idealistic? No. Is it difficult to attain? Absolutely. But it doesn't mean it's not worth pursuing. Just like the notion of spreading democracy as an idea is an admirable one. The problem is the rest of the world doesn't all want to be like the United States. And until we understand the true diversity of the rest of the world, then our attempts to speak to that world, sometimes to preach to that world, or even to impose upon that world our vision, are going to be resented and resisted. But it's an age-old back and forth seesaw in the American experience. We have idealism followed by realism, followed by idealism, followed by realism, and some combination of the two. One more. Yeah.
Were you going to make any other comments about Henry Cabot Lodge, or did I nod off during that point?
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble. The acoustics are...
I thought you mentioned Henry Cabot Lodge, and I thought you were going to refer to him.
Henry Cabot Lodge is the man who killed the League of Nations. Henry Cabot Lodge was the Republican leader in the United States Senate. And he hated Wilson, and Wilson hated him. I mean, there was an intensely personal animosity that existed. And the irony is that Henry Cabot Lodge knew Wilson psychologically. He knew that Wilson was not the sort to compromise. He was willing to compromise. He offered what were called the Lodge reservations, which again would have allowed the country to go into the League with some restriction. For example, here was the big issue. And it's a very logical, I think Lodge has been pilloried, but here's a very logical debate. Should a world body have the power to send U.S. troops anywhere in the world without Congress's approval? Now, that's a very healthy debate to have. And Lodge and his colleagues basically were perfectly willing to enter into a world league, but they were not willing to surrender that degree of sovereignty over American foreign policy and American lives. They knew that Wilson was so committed to the League that he had negotiated in Paris that he would almost certainly never agree to any compromise, particularly one that had Lodge's name on it. And they were right in that. Mrs. Wilson lived on to be 89 years old. She died on her husband's birthday in 1961. That day, she was supposed to dedicate the Woodrow Wilson Bridge in Washington, D.C. And to the end of her life, she always referred to Henry Cabot Lodge as that stinking snake. But if you get beyond the name-calling and the personalities, you will find that Lodge and those who agreed with Lodge were not ostriches putting their head in the sand, but patriots who wanted to find a way for America to break out of its traditional isolation without ceasing to be America. Thank you very much.